You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. Angelina Jolie. Yes, that Angelina, the Oscar-winning actress, the activist, the woman the world watched grow from Hollywood rebel to humanitarian icon, accepts Islam. Now pause. What's the first thing that hits your mind? Shock? Curiosity? Judgment? That reaction says more about us than it does about her. And today I want to use her hypothetical journey not to debate faith, but to teach you about transformation, courage, and what happens when you choose to follow truth over trends. Let's break this down. You know what nobody tells you about making a massive life change? It's terrifying. Because every time you make a radical shift, whether it's in your career, your beliefs, your relationships, or your identity, you're not just stepping into something new, you're also burning down what people thought they knew about you. Let's take Angelina Jolie in this story. One of the most photographed, watched, and dissected women in the world. An actress, director, activist, mother, and UN ambassador. For decades, everything she did made headlines. People thought they knew her. They had a box ready with her name on it. The edgy actress who wore blood vials. The humanitarian who adopted children from war-torn countries. The ex-wife of Brad Pitt. That's the version the world agreed on. Then imagine, one day she steps forward and says, "I've accepted Islam." Boom. The box explodes. And in that one sentence, she challenges millions of assumptions about who she is, what she believes, and what path she's chosen. That's not a small step. That's a psychological earthquake. And make no mistake, that takes radical courage. We talk a lot about courage like it's this heroic movie moment thing. But real courage, it's quiet, it's lonely. It shows up in the small, gut-wrenching moments where you realize, if I take this step, people will no longer see me the same way, and you take it anyway. For someone like Angelina Jolie, to accept Islam isn't just a personal decision, it's a global headline. It's a declaration that doesn't stay private. It gets posted, tweeted, analyzed, criticized, memed, twisted. Everyone suddenly has an opinion. Everyone suddenly knows what's really going on. You don't just risk being misunderstood, you guarantee it. But here's the thing, when someone takes a step like that, it tells us something incredibly valuable. It tells us that what they've found on the inside is more important than what the world sees on the outside. That's what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to walk through it because something greater is pulling you forward. And let's be real, changing your belief system is one of the hardest things you can ever do. Why? Because your beliefs are your roots. They're how you make sense of life. And when you shift those, it feels like the ground beneath your feet is moving. Everything gets reevaluated. Your past, your priorities, your people. That's scary. But it's also incredibly powerful. Because it means you're not living by autopilot anymore. You're choosing who you are. So when we look at a move like Jolie's from an outsider's perspective, we might say that's shocking. But from her perspective, it probably felt more like that's necessary. And that right there is the lesson. The world might call it radical, but for the person walking that path, it's just honest. Radical courage isn't about making noise, it's about standing still in a storm. It's about knowing that you might lose people, opportunities, or status, and deciding that your peace is worth it, that your truth is bigger than their comfort, and that your next chapter deserves to be written in your own voice, not the one people assigned you years ago. Whether or not you ever make a spiritual shift like Angelina, remember this. Every breakthrough you want requires breaking through something else first: fear, approval, expectation, identity. And when you do it with integrity, with clarity, with conviction, that's not just brave, that's revolutionary. Most of us get to evolve in private. We can make mistakes quietly, change our opinions without writing a press release, explore new ideas without anyone watching. But celebrities, public figures, they don't get that luxury. When someone like Angelina Jolie makes a spiritual shift, like accepting Islam, it doesn't stay in the family group chat. It hits the front page of global media. It trends before she even finishes her first prayer. And the world reacts fast, loud, and often with zero understanding. Why is that? Because public figures are treated less like people and more like products. Once the world has labeled you, you're expected to play your role. Angelina was cast in the global imagination as the rebel-turned-humanitarian. She stood for UN causes, international adoption, women's rights, and she did all that while wearing designer dresses and walking red carpets. And that image, while impressive, became fit. So the second she makes a move that doesn't align with the script people wrote for her, people don't just get confused, they get offended. It's wild, but true. Fans often feel betrayed when a public figure changes. They say things like, "This isn't the person I admire." But here's what they're really saying: "This isn't the version of you I was comfortable with." The pressure that puts on someone like Jolie is immense. She has to carry not just her own beliefs, but everyone's expectations about what she's supposed to believe. And when it comes to religion, especially Islam, the stakes are even higher, because now you're not just dealing with lifestyle change, you're dealing with centuries of misunderstanding, with deeply rooted stereotypes, with people who will instantly make assumptions based on fear, misinformation, and headlines from decades of conflict. The moment Jolie chooses Islam, she knows what's coming. The media will dissect every verse. They'll question her motives. Some will call it a publicity stunt. Others will accuse her of turning her back on Western values, whatever that even means. She will lose fans, she will lose endorsements, and in some circles, she will lose respect. And here's the kicker: none of that has anything to do with her actual belief. It has to do with perception. Public figures have to navigate a minefield every time they do something personal in public, because their audience isn't just watching, they're judging, reacting, and projecting their own fears onto them. Jolie could be quietly seeking peace, deepening her spiritual understanding, connecting with a faith that speaks to her heart, and yet the world sees controversy, not curiosity. And that's the unique pressure public figures face. They don't get to grow without scrutiny. Think about it: when you or I read a book that shifts our thinking, or start practicing a new faith, maybe a few people notice, but for her, every step is documented, magnified, analyzed. Her scarf becomes a symbol. Her silence is interpreted as strategy. Her prayers are politicized. So the lesson here is powerful. We need to stop expecting celebrities to stay the same just because we don't want to evolve. Just because someone is famous doesn't mean they owe you consistency. They owe themselves authenticity. If Angelina Jolie chooses to accept Islam in this story, it's not a scandal. It's a human being reaching for meaning. The real story isn't the religion, it's the reaction. And it's a mirror of how uncomfortable we are when someone challenges the box we put them in. So the next time you see a public figure make a bold shift, pause the judgment, replace curiosity with compassion. Because under the spotlight behind the headlines, there's just another human being trying to live with purpose. There comes a moment in every person's life, celebrity or not, when you realize that living for other people's expectations is slowly killing who you actually are. Now imagine that on a global scale. When someone like Angelina Jolie chooses to embrace Islam, the world doesn't just see it as a spiritual decision, they see it as a betrayal of image. Why? Because society has a script for us, especially if we're in the public eye. And if you veer off that script, the backlash is swift and unforgiving. But here's the thing: there's a difference between the life you're expected to live and the life your soul actually needs. Jolie's story, real or hypothetical, illustrates that tension perfectly. She's spent decades building a public identity, not just as an actress, but as a humanitarian, a mother, a global figure who stands for compassion and justice. And in the public's mind, that identity comes with rules. You can be spiritual but not too spiritual. You can believe in something, but don't make it weird. You can be open-minded, but don't actually change anything fundamental about yourself. In other words, be authentic, but only in ways that make people comfortable. So when she chooses Islam, people freak out, not because they understand what Islam actually teaches, but because they feel she's stepped outside the image they approved of. And that's the trap of social expectation. It's not about who you really are, it's about who people need you to be, so they can feel secure in their worldview. But spiritual identity doesn't work like that. It's not something you perform for an audience, it's something you pursue for peace. It's deeply internal. It doesn't ask for permission, it demands honesty. And honesty, that's the real threat to social expectation. When Jolie steps into a new faith, she's saying something powerful without even speaking. I will no longer prioritize your comfort over my clarity. That's the shift. That's the moment everything changes. When you stop playing the role and start living the truth. Now let's talk about what that looks like in real life. Because maybe you're not famous, but I guarantee you felt this same pressure. You want to change your lifestyle, but your friends say you're acting different. You start setting boundaries, and your family says you're being selfish. You explore a new belief system, and people accuse you of being lost. What they're really saying is, you're not fitting into the version of you that I'm used to. But guess what? Growth is uncomfortable for everyone. Spiritual identity requires you to let go of who you've been, and lean into who you're becoming. That's not rebellion, that's maturity, and it's what scares people the most, because your growth highlights where they've stayed stuck. So in Jolie's case, her decision to follow Islam isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. It says, I care more about being aligned with my values than I do about applause, and that's a lesson for all of us. At some point you have to choose between being liked and being honest, between fitting in and feeling whole. The world will always have expectations, but your soul, your truth, that's yours alone. No press tour, no approval rating, no audience. The most powerful transformation happens when you stop performing and start aligning. And when you do that, when you choose spiritual identity over social expectation, you don't just change your life, you reclaim it. When someone like Angelina Jolie embraces Islam, the conversation can't just stop at shock or curiosity. You have to dig deep. You have to ask, what did she see? What did she feel? What did she experience that made this faith speak louder than anything else? And to do that, you have to look at Islam, not through the lens of politics, not through media headlines, not through what your uncle once said at a dinner table, but through the eyes of a seeker, someone who is searching, someone who is hungry for depth, meaning and inner peace. Because that's who Jolie represents in this story. Not a celebrity chasing attention, but a human being on a path. A woman who has seen the extremes of this world, the luxury, the war zones, the cameras, the silence, and who's asking, what now, what more, what's real? When you approach Islam as a seeker, you don't see dogma, you see design, structure, order, a rhythm that pulls your heart into alignment with something bigger than yourself. 5 daily prayers. It's not about ritual for the sake of ritual. It's about anchoring yourself in a chaotic world. It's about stopping everything 5 times a day to remind yourself who you are and why you're here. That changes you. Then there's fasting, not just to lose weight, not just to say you did it, but to cleanse your soul, to train your mind, to detach from the constant craving of consumption. You begin to see food differently, time differently, your own body differently. And charity, it's not about giving what's extra, it's about purifying what's yours. It's about understanding that wealth doesn't make you better, it makes you responsible. That's a mindset that's spiritual maturity. Now imagine someone like Jolie, who has spent years working in refugee camps, standing with people who have lost everything, watching entire nations suffer. Imagine her learning that Islam doesn't just encourage charity, it requires it. That it makes compassion a pillar, not an option. That's not just impressive, it's transformative. But it doesn't stop there. The real breakthrough comes when she reads the words of the Quran for the first time, not from a news article, not quoted out of context, but with her own eyes, slowly, privately, reflectively. And what does she find? Verses about mercy, about patience, about forgiveness, even when you've been wronged, about justice for the orphan, for the oppressed, for the forgotten. She doesn't just see a religion, she sees a worldview, a way to live with integrity, even when no one's watching. And that's what a seeker is always searching for. Something that feels true, something that cuts through the noise, something that doesn't just give answers, but gives you questions that are worth asking. Islam, through the eyes of a seeker, isn't just a religion, it's a framework, it's a mirror. It's a guide back to who you were before the world told you who to be. So when Angelina Jolie accepts Islam, it's not about headlines, it's not rebellion, it's recognition. She sees in it a reflection of the values she's always carried: justice, discipline, humility, responsibility. But now they have structure, they have roots, they have a spiritual home, and that's the part most people miss, because we're so used to judging faith from the outside that we forget how completely different it looks and feels when you experience it from within. It's easy to dismiss what you don't understand, but the moment you put on the lens of a seeker, you stop asking, why would someone believe this? And you start asking, what did they find here that I haven't even looked for yet? Let's be brutally honest for a second. The word Islam has been one of the most misunderstood, misrepresented, and misjudged words in the modern world. When people hear it, especially in the West, a lot of them immediately picture conflict, oppression, restriction. Not because that's the reality of the faith, but because that's what decades of media conditioning, political narratives, and cultural bias have taught them to associate with it. And then someone like Angelina Jolie, someone who's known globally, someone respected for her humanitarian work, her intellect, her independence, steps forward and says, "This is the path I choose." That moment breaks something wide open. It challenges the script. It messes with people's mental shortcuts, because now you're forced to ask, if someone like her, educated, empowered, compassionate, chooses Islam, then what have I misunderstood? That question is powerful, because it begins to unravel the stereotypes that have been holding people back from learning the truth. Here's what people forget. Stereotypes don't just harm others, they limit you. They build walls between you and growth, between you and new perspectives, between you and actual understanding. And those walls are strong until someone kicks them down. When Jolie enters Islam in this story, she doesn't just convert. She reframes the entire conversation. She brings visibility to a side of Islam that most people never get to see. The side that's intellectual, peaceful, balanced. The side that's full of tradition and beauty and a relentless focus on justice, kindness and discipline. Suddenly the same people who once thought Islam was oppressive are watching a woman they admire walk into it with grace and confidence. And that doesn't add up in their old mental model. That's the moment a stereotype dies, not through argument, not through debate, but through example. And that is exactly how change starts. One of the most dangerous lies people believe is that Islam is incompatible with intelligence, freedom, or modern life. Jolie's decision flips that on its head. It says, this isn't a step backward, this is a step deeper. It says, you can think critically and still choose faith. You can be progressive and still value tradition. You can be strong and still surrender to something greater than yourself. In fact, it takes more strength to live by faith in a skeptical world than to follow the crowd. Let's be clear, breaking a stereotype doesn't mean pleasing everyone. In fact, it often means the opposite. Jolie would know that the moment she speaks out, she'd be called names. People would question her sanity, her motives, her identity. But you know what she'd be doing through all that? Living free. Because true freedom is not doing whatever you want, it's doing what's true to you even if nobody else gets it. And the truth is, every time someone challenges a stereotype, especially someone with influence, they create space for others to be curious instead of afraid, for others to explore instead of judge, for others to ask better questions. So if you're watching this kind of transformation and your first reaction is confusion, good, sit with it. Let it stretch you, because that's where growth begins. On the other side of discomfort, the real power of this story isn't just that a celebrity accepted Islam, it's that she opened a door for millions to look again, to unlearn, to see Islam, not as a soundbite but as a system of meaning, a lifestyle of purpose, a path walked by 2 billion people not in darkness, but in light. And all it took to reframe it was one person brave enough to live her truth in public. There is something extraordinary about a person who chooses growth over approval, something rare. Because let's face it, most people don't change because they're afraid of what others will think. They don't step into who they really are because they've spent their lives chasing validation from people who barely know them, or worse, barely see them. Now picture Angelina Jolie, an icon, someone whose life has been photographed, analyzed, and commented on since she was in her 20s. Imagine what it takes for a woman like her to stop, look at herself in the mirror and say, I'm gonna choose what aligns with my soul even if the entire world doesn't get it. That's not rebellion, that's not drama, that's courage. It's easy to play it, to stay in the image people built for you, to keep feeding the version of you that gets the most likes, the most praise, the most comfort. But real transformation doesn't happen in comfort. It happens when you make a choice that scares you because it's real. And Jolie in this story makes exactly that choice. She accepts Islam, not because it's trending, not because it scores points in the media, but because it speaks to her, because it gives her grounding in a life that's been full of extremes, fame, chaos, humanitarian work, loss. It's not a phase, it's not a costume, it's a calling. The moment she follows that calling, she crosses a line from public identity to personal integrity. That's a huge shift, because now every headline that gets written, every assumption that gets made, every opinion tossed her way, it all becomes background noise, not because it stops but because she's no longer owned by it. And that is where true power begins. Public opinion is a wave, it changes with the wind. One day you're a hero, the next day you're a controversy. And if you base your identity on what people think of you, you'll never know peace. You'll always be performing, always editing, always asking what do they want from me, instead of what do I want from this life. But when you transform from the inside, when your change comes from conviction and not applause, you build something no critic can take from you, inner strength. Jolie's choice is not just spiritual, it's a declaration. It says, I am not here to entertain you with my choice, I am here to live with truth. And you know what happens when someone stands in their truth? It shifts everything around them. People notice, people listen differently. Some walk away, but some get inspired to look inward. Because transformation is contagious. When one person chooses truth over approval, it creates space for others to do the same, and not just in religion. In every part of life. Maybe it's the person who's scared to leave a toxic relationship, or someone afraid to change career, or someone who wants to practice their faith but keeps hiding, because their friends wouldn't understand. This story reminds us that transformation is always worth it, even if the price is being misunderstood, because public opinion will fade, headlines disappear, people forget what they were mad about, but your growth, your peace, your alignment with your values, that stays. That sustains you when the cameras are gone and the applause goes silent. And that's what this keynote is really about. The kind of freedom that comes from living a life that's yours, not borrowed, not performed, not explained to anyone who's determined not to understand. The world will always have opinions, but your transformation, that's personal, that's powerful, and no one, not even the loudest voices, can take that away. So what happens when a global icon like Angelina Jolie accepts Islam? It forces the world to stop and look again, not just at her but at everything we thought we knew. It makes you realize that faith isn't a label, it's not a costume you wear to get approval, it's a personal revolution. It's an unshakable decision to stop living on the surface, and start digging into the depths of who you really are. We saw the fear she might have felt, we explored the shift from social expectation to spiritual identity. We walked through her experience as a seeker, finding peace, structure and meaning in a faith that's so often misunderstood, and we watched as she shattered the stereotypes people love to cling to, not with speeches but with quiet confidence. More than anything, we witnessed a woman choosing personal transformation over public opinion, and that's the real shock, not that she chose Islam, but that she chose herself, her truth, her alignment, her freedom. You don't have to be famous to do that. You just have to be willing to live a life that's honest, a life that makes sense to your soul, even if it confuses everyone else. So here's the takeaway. Whether you believe what she believes or not isn't the point. The point is this. Don't let the noise of the world drown out the voice within you, because that voice, that's your guide, that's your truth, that's your compass. And if Angelina Jolie can risk the world's judgment to follow hers, so can you. Now the question is, will